Imagine a country with like virtually zero natural resources.
Right.
It has this rapidly aging population where retirees are essentially crushing the active workforce, and it boasts some of the absolute highest labor costs on the planet.
Yeah, which sounds like a total disaster on paper.
Exactly. I mean, by all traditional textbook economic laws, this country should be bankrupt or, at least stagnating into oblivion.
It should be struggling, definitely.
But instead, it's the wealthiest, most innovative, and most stable nation on Earth. Like, by a long shot.
It really defies gravity.
It does. And today, we have our hands on a custom-tailored 15-page academic data deck that proves exactly how they broke all the rules of macroeconomics.
The fascinating look under the hood.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you are joining us today because we have a really amazing mission ahead of us.
We really do.
We're exploring this highly specific presentation outline titled Switzerland's Sustained Prosperity, Macroeconomic, Social, and Innovation Insights Based on Data.
That's a mouthful, but the data itself is incredible.
It totally is. And for you listening right now, I want you to mentally set the visual stage with me.
Yeah, because it's a very specific aesthetic, isn't it? It communicates a lot before you even read a single number.
Oh, absolutely. It really does.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine the physical deck of this report. Picture a minimalist, pure white presentation.
Just stark white.
Yeah, like hex code FFF, just absolute pristine white. There are no distracting 3D graphics here at all.
No pie charts popping out at you.
Right. No loud, obnoxious neon colors trying to grab your attention. No, like, stock photos of people shaking hands in a glass boardroom.
Just pure data.
Exactly. It's entirely built on crisp academic shades of gray, blue, navy, and deep charcoal. It feels serious.
Very disciplined.
And puncturing that calm, disciplined sea of low saturation blue are these very deliberate flat red arrows and dotted red circles.
They really draw the eye.
They act like a sniper scope. They zero your eye directly in on crucial data anomalies, extreme values, and turning points. The data here tells a story of an anomaly.
And the story that this minimalist deck tells, which we're going to dissect using a massive repository of World Bank data, by the way, it establishes a profound overarching theme.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, it asks, and then mathematically answers, how a small, landlocked European country engineered a massive interconnected feedback loop of wealth, health, innovation, and environmental sustainability.
A feedback loop.
Right. It's a masterclass in treating a nation as a highly calibrated, integrated system.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly appreciate how wild this is, we have to start by looking at the sheer scale of the wealth here.
The baseline numbers.
Yeah, slide 3, the economic pace. When I first look at this data, my immediate assumption was, okay, to generate this much cash per person, these people must be working 80-hour weeks.
Just grinding constantly.
Right. They must be a hyper-stressed, overworked society just churning out labor. But that's not it at all, is it?
Not even close.
Yeah.
If you look at the World Bank series data for GDP per capita,
right,
and we are looking at this in constant 2015 US dollars, just to be clear.
So no inflation's skewing the numbers.
Exactly, meaning we've entirely stripped away the illusion of inflation to get a pure measure of actual purchasing power. The trajectory is just relentless.
It's a straight shot up.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
You trace it back to the 1970s, and it's hovering around $40,000 to $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
But as your eye moves forward in time, that gray-blue line just climbs and climbs.
And right at the end of that line, the authors have placed one of those stark, dashed red circles.
Highlighting the peak.
Yeah, and inside that circle is a figure that defies gravity. It's an astronomical number surpassing $80,000, approaching $85,000 per person.
It's staggering.
But it's not just the endpoint that blew my mind, It's the resilience of that line.
The stability through crises.
Exactly. The line barely flinches during the 2008 global financial crisis. It absorbs the dot-com bubble bursting. It absorbs global supply chain shocks. It just absorbs them like a sponge.
What's fascinating here is that historically, extraordinarily high wealth is usually a really fragile state.
How do you mean?
Well, think of petrostates, right? Their GDP collapses the second the price of barrel of oil drops.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or export-heavy nations that crater when global demand cools off.
Mm.
But Switzerland's gross national income and their adjusted net national income, they show this indestructible trend.
Wow.
Even adjusting for the consumption of fixed capital and natural resource depletion, the Swiss citizen is generating and retaining a staggering amount of value.
So it's real wealth, not just a bubble.
Precisely. They are fundamentally wealthy on a level most developed nations only dream of, and it's insulated from the usual global boom and bust cycles.
So we have this mountain of unshakable wealth, but right next to this data, on slide 4, the deck drops a massive shadow over the whole thing.
The demographic reality.
Yeah, it's the demographic profile. The overlapping area chart here shows an older population that is just exploding.
It's a steep climb.
We're looking at a climb in the old age dependency ratio from around 15% back in the 1960s to over 30% today.
Double the burden.
Right. And if you look at the total age dependency ratio in the raw data, it has pushed past 53%.
That's a critical threshold.
So for someone listening who isn't looking at demographic charts all day, what does total age dependency ratio actually mean in plain English?
It's a really critical concept. The dependency ratio measures the number of dependents, meaning people who are typically too young to work, like children, or too old to work, like retirees.
Okay, the non-workers.
Right. It compares them to the active working age population. When your total dependency hits 53%, it means that for roughly every 2 active workers in the economy, there is more than 1 non-worker who needs to be supported by the system.
Okay, so if we use an analogy,
Okay.
Imagine a large rowboat. 50 years ago, you had 8 people rowing hard and maybe 2 people sitting in the back resting.
The boat moves fast.
Exactly, the boat flies. But today, you have 6 people rowing and 4 people sitting in the back.
Yeah.
The rowers have to work exponentially harder just to keep the boat moving at the same speed, let alone accelerate.
That is exactly right. And historically, what happens to that boat?
It slows down.
It slows down. Economists call this the demographic time bomb.
The time bomb, right.
Because when a population rapidly ages, several devastating things happen simultaneously to a nation's balance sheet.
Like what?
First, your tax base shrinks because fewer people are in their prime peak career earning years.
That makes sense.
Second, your pension liabilities just explode. You have a massive cohort of retirees pulling money out of the system for a much longer period than previous generations did.
Because they're living longer.
Exactly. And third, your healthcare costs go absolutely parabolic. Aging populations require exponentially more medical intervention, surgeries, long-term care, you name it.
It's a structural trap. I mean, normally when the ratio of retirees to active workers explodes like this, economies stagnate.
Growth basically dies.
Yeah, and innovation slows down because older populations, generally speaking, tend to be more risk-averse. They aren't starting aggressive new tech companies in their 70s.
Precisely. It is the friction between these two economic realities that makes this deck so interesting.
The wealth versus the demographics.
Right. You have astronomical resilient wealth on one hand, and a demographic profile that should mathematically destroy that wealth on the other. This is the paradox the data presents.
Why isn't Switzerland's economy collapsing under the weight of its own aging population?
Exactly.
So how do they actually pull that off? If the labor pool is shrinking, how are the profits hitting record highs?
The answer lies in a radical redefinition of human capital.
Oh, okay, tell me more about that.
Well, Switzerland realized decades ago that when you have a demographic pyramid that is incredibly top-heavy, you can no longer rely on the quantity of your workforce.
You just don't have the bodies.
You simply do not have the bodies. Therefore, you must completely, fanatically optimize the quality and the yield of every single human being in your economy.
Okay, so you've built a society where the workforce is tiny but has to carry a massive load. How do you physically engineer a population to do that?
It takes intense investment.
Right, because you can't just command people to be more productive.
Okay.
That brings us to the human capital engine of this deck, starting on slide 5.
Health outcomes.
Yeah, and if the wealth data was surprising, this is where the Swiss model starts to look like proactive social engineering. Let's look at the health outcomes. The data here is just wild.
It's a very striking dual-axis chart.
It is. On one side, you have female life expectancy at birth shooting upward from 74 years to an absolute peak of nearly 86 years today.
Incredible longevity.
And on the other side, infant mortality drops off an absolute cliff. It goes from over 24 deaths per 1,000 live births down to an incredibly low 3.5.
And if you dig into the World Bank mortality data that supports this, the sheer consistency of that improvement is breathtaking.
It's not just a fluke?
No, not at all. Neonatal mortality, under 5 mortality, they all mirror this cliff dive.
Wow.
Maternal mortality is essentially eradicated, hovering at a minuscule 11 to 14 per 100,000 live births. It is statistically one of the safest places on Earth to be born.
And one of the most likely places on Earth to live deep into your late 80s.
Exactly.
But the data on slide 6 also shows how they achieve this, and frankly, it looks wildly expensive.
The medical resources.
Yeah, there's this matrix of little human icons representing doctors. It's an icon array. And as you move across the timeline, the density of these doctors just explodes.
With a huge surge in personnel.
Right. A red circle highlights the growth from 1.4 physicians per 1,000 people to over 4.4 physicians per 1,000 people today.
That is an incredibly high density of medical resources. And it goes beyond just general practitioners, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the data set highlights the density of the specialist surgical workforce as well. They are flooding the zone with highly trained medical professionals.
Let me push back on this for a second, though.
Sure.
Is having 4.4 doctors per 1,000 people actually a cause of their prosperity, or is it just a luxury of already being rich?
That's the classic chicken and egg question.
Right. I mean, when your GDP per capita is 85 grand, of course you can afford to train and hire a ton of doctors. Aren't they just buying a world-class healthcare system because they have the extra cash lying around?
That is a highly perceptive question, and the causality is deeply intertwined. But, and this is key, you have to view this medical investment through the lens of that demographic time bomb we just discussed.
The rowboat.
The robo, exactly. When your active workforce is shrinking relative to your retirees, you absolutely cannot afford for your workers to be sick.
Oh, wow.
You cannot afford lost labor hours due to preventable illness. You cannot afford the economic shock of a high maternal mortality rate or a workforce crippled by chronic unmanaged conditions.
Oh, I see. So it's not a luxury perk. It's an economic defense mechanism.
Exactly. Think of it strictly in terms of macroeconomic efficiency.
Okay.
The relentless, high-density investment in healthcare infrastructure, those 4.4 doctors per 1,000 people, guarantees a stable, highly reliable, continuously functioning labor force.
It keeps the few rowers they have in peak physical condition.
Precisely. It mitigates the economic risks of their aging population. Switzerland didn't just get rich and then casually decide to buy better health care.
Right.
The relentless investment in keeping citizens alive, optimally healthy, and physically capable of working is the economic engine. It prevents value destruction.
Okay, so you have this incredibly healthy population, but a healthy workforce isn't automatically a rich workforce.
Right.
You can be perfectly healthy, rarely miss a day of work, and still be doing low-wage manual labor. How do they actually convert that baseline physical health into $80,000 a head?
That is the crucial pivot. Health keeps the engine running, but education is what dictates the value of the output.
Which is perfectly illustrated by the education data on slide 7. The jump here is just staggering.
It's a massive societal shift.
Yeah. We see a bold red up arrow pointing to tertiary education gross enrollment. So we're talking universities, advanced technical colleges, higher ed.
The advanced skills.
Right. It skyrockets from the low double digits decades ago to over 74% today.
Remarkable.
Over 74% entering higher education. What does a society even look like when 3/4 of its youth are in advanced education?
It looks like a bottomless reservoir of what economists call talent dividends.
Talent dividends. I like that.
Yeah, and if we look closely at the World Bank data surrounding this, it's not just about having a degree, it's about the massification of highly specialized advanced skills.
Because they have to specialize.
Yeah, exactly. When you only have a few million people in your workforce, you cannot compete on the global stage with brute force. You cannot outmanufacture the massive billion-person populations of Asia or the vast industrial landscapes of the Americas.
Right. If you only have a few million workers, you can't build giant factories to assemble cheap plastic toys or fast fashion. You just don't have the hands for it.
Precisely. You have to compete entirely on intellect and specialization.
And that's where the 74% comes in.
Yes. By pushing 74% of their population into higher education, they are ensuring that their small workforce is capable of performing the most complex, highest value tasks in the global economy.
Wow.
They are essentially upgrading the software of their entire population.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we have now built the ultimate human being on paper.
We really have.
We have a population that lives incredibly long, rarely gets sick, is supported by an absolute army of doctors, and goes to university at massive rates.
The perfect workforce.
But what exactly are they doing all day with those big, healthy, educated brains to generate that wealth?
Right, they have to produce something.
Exactly. You can't just have a nation of healthy people reading advanced philosophy to each other in cafes and expect to be a global economic superpower.
Indeed, you cannot. And that perfectly frames the operational core of the Swiss paradigm. How do you deploy this ultra-premium human capital?
And this is where the academic data starts to map out what I can only describe as a global empire built purely on ideas.
Slide 8, the innovation mode.
Yes, slide 8. We look at the innovation and integration data. The visual here is a double line graph, and both lines are just hyperactive, zigzagging upward.
Very volatile, but trending incredibly high.
One represents resident patent applications, and the other represents trademark registrations. There's a red circle highlighting the plateau here. The sheer, overwhelming volume of intellectual property being generated by such a small population is just mind-boggling.
And the World Bank data confirms this is not a recent, trendy spike.
It's not just a tech boom.
No, it's a long-term, multi-decade sustained commitment to research and development. The density of R&D personnel and researchers in Switzerland is consistently among the highest on the planet.
They're putting those degrees to work.
Exactly. They are systematically taking that 74% tertiary education rate and converting it directly into patented, legally protected knowledge.
Why patents, though? Like, why is the focus so intensely on intellectual property rather than, say, dominating software platforms like Silicon Valley or mass consumer electronics like Japan or South Korea?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at geography and history.
Geography, how so?
Well, Switzerland is landlocked. It is extremely mountainous.
Right, the Alps.
Yeah. Historically, it did not have massive deep-water ports to easily import cheap raw materials like iron ore or coal.
Oh, that makes sense.
And conversely, it couldn't easily export massive, heavy, cheap finished goods over those mountains. They were forced by their geography to invent things that had an incredibly high value-to-weight ratio.
Oh, wow, that makes total sense, like watches.
Exactly. A mechanical watch requires very little raw metal, but thousands of hours of highly specialized, patented engineering.
The value is in the brain power, not the steel.
Exactly. And that historical necessity evolved. Today, it's not just watches. It's precision medical devices, cutting-edge pharmaceuticals, robotics, and advanced microcomponents.
The data on slide 9 backs that up brilliantly.
The exports.
Yeah. There's a donut chart that tracks the share of medium and high-tech products in their total manufactured exports. The highlighted chunk is massive. Over 70%.
Over 2/3 of their physical exports.
Over 70% of what they physically make and sell to the rest of the world is medium to high tech.
This is the strategy of high-value barriers. Because Switzerland has high wages and high living standards, they absolutely cannot compete on price.
They'd lose every time.
Every time. If they tried to make basic consumer goods, they would be undercut by global competitors and bankrupt in a month.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's like, think about the restaurant industry.
Okay, I'm with you.
You have massive fast food chains that compete on volume and cheap ingredients. That's the mass manufacturing model.
Sell 1 billion burgers for $2 each.
Exactly. But Switzerland is operating like an ultra-exclusive 3 Michelin star restaurant.
I like this analogy.
They aren't selling you the raw ingredients, the flour and the water. The raw materials in a Michelin star dish might only cost a few dollars.
Right.
What you are paying hundreds of dollars for is the recipe, the technique, the years of training, the absolute precision. Switzerland exports the knowledge inside the product.
That is a brilliant analogy. Because when a hospital in Tokyo or New York buys a high-tech Swiss surgical robot, they aren't paying for the plastic and titanium.
The materials are cheap.
Right. They are paying for the tens of thousands of hours of highly educated, patented research that went into designing it. They have removed themselves from the race to the bottom in global manufacturing and entrenched themselves at the absolute peak of the value chain.
But the physical goods are only half the story, aren't they?
That's right.
Because the data then shifts to the invisible economy on slide 10, commercial service exports. We see this stacked bar chart, and there's a solid black arrow pointing to the top. It shows financial services, insurance, and intellectual property services making up a massive 15 to 30% of their commercial service exports.
This is the genius of the Swiss model.
Oh.
IP royalties and financial services act as a massive spillover effect.
Spillover.
Yeah. When you license a pharmaceutical patent to a factory in another country, or when your financial sector manages global wealth, you are earning massive, continuous global revenue streams without having to physically put a single good on a truck.
Oh, wow.
You're doing it without burning fuel to ship it and without using local raw materials. It is a frictionless export.
It's pure profit margin. They built an economic castle and surrounded it with a moat made entirely of patents, copyrights, and financial acumen.
A very deep moat.
But let's bring this back to the average citizen for a second. If the economy is entirely based on these high-level, elite, hyper-specialized exports, what does that do to the average worker?
You might expect a divide.
Yeah, does it create massive inequality where only the patent lawyers and the investment bankers thrive and everyone else is just left behind?
You would think so, but the labor market data on slide 11 says otherwise. The chart tracks something called vulnerable employment.
Which means what, exactly?
Vulnerable employment means gig work, informal labor, jobs without basic security or benefits.
Oh, okay, the precarious jobs.
Right. In Switzerland, that number is shrinking to less than 10%.
Less than 10% vulnerable employment, meaning over 90% of the workforce is in formal, secure, well-compensated roles.
Yes. And the labor force itself is steadily growing to nearly 5 million people. Because they are operating inside this high-tech, patent-protected mode, Swiss companies have massive profit margins.
Right, they aren't penny pinching.
They are not fighting for pennies on the dollar. Those high margins allow them to pay exceptionally high wages, provide excellent benefits, and ensure job security.
So the wealth trickles down securely.
The high-value export economy directly funds the stability of the domestic labor market. It is a virtuous cycle.
Okay, I'm following the logic, and it is a beautifully designed system. But I have to take a step back and look at global history for a second.
Sure, let's zoom in.
Historically, when a nation becomes a hyper-wealthy, high-tech manufacturing and financial powerhouse, there's almost always a dark side, a massive shadow.
Environmental cost.
Exactly. Usually, massive industrial output and hyperconsumption by a wealthy populace lead to devastating environmental degradation. We see it in the smog of the Industrial Revolution. We see it in the heavily polluted rivers of mid-century America. We see it in the rapid industrialization of Asia.
The assumption is that wealth equals carbon.
Wealth equals carbon. But the data here, starting on slide 12, claims that Switzerland has broken this 200-year-old macroeconomic rule entirely.
This brings us to what might be the most important and certainly the most heavily debated economic concept of the 21st century: ecological decoupling.
Right, decoupling. The visual for this is probably the most dramatic chart in the entire deck.
The scissors chart.
Yeah, analysts call it a scissors chart. Picture two lines starting together on the left side of the graph. For a long time, they hold hands. They move in tandem.
Growing together.
But then they hit a pivot point. The data looks like a physical divorce. One line, which represents GDP and economic growth, keeps going up, climbing higher and higher into that $80,000 per capita territory.
A wealth line.
Right. But the other line, which represents CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, it violently splits apart, bends downward, and begins to plummet.
It's a striking divergence.
And right at the exact moment where those lines cross and go their separate ways, the authors have placed a dotted red circle. They call it absolute decoupling.
Yes, absolute decoupling.
Let's define our terms here, because this is crucial. What exactly is the difference between relative decoupling and absolute decoupling? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Absolutely. Let's use cars.
Okay, I like cars.
Imagine you drive a massive, inefficient, gas-guzzling truck. Relative decoupling is like tuning the engine of that truck so it gets slightly better gas mileage.
Okay.
You are still driving more miles every year, and you are still burning more total gas every year, but you are doing it slightly more efficiently than before.
So the pollution is still going up.
Yes, your emissions are still growing, just slower than your mileage. For a century, human progress was strictly coupled to carbon in exactly this way.
Okay, so relative decoupling is just doing the bad thing slightly less badly.
That's a good way to put it.
What is absolute decoupling then?
Absolute decoupling is trading in the gas guzzler for a fully electric vehicle powered by solar panels and then driving twice as many miles.
Oh, wow.
Your economic output's doubling, but your total raw carbon emissions are actively, physically shrinking to zero. Absolute decoupling, which is what the Swiss data demonstrates, means the economy is growing robustly, while the total raw carbon footprint is shrinking in absolute terms.
But how is that physically possible? I understand the service economy part, bankers typing on keyboards don't emit much CO2.
Sure.
But we just established they have a massive 7% medium to high-tech manufacturing export sector. If they are making all these physical goods, medical devices, robotics, how are they not polluting?
It's a confluence of incredibly rigorous policies.
Yeah.
First, as we noted, for the manufacturing they do retain, it is low volume, high margin precision goods.
Right, they aren't smelting millions of tons of cheap steel.
Exactly. But second, and most importantly, it's a relentless, uncompromising transition to clean energy.
Which we see on slide 13. The ecological baseline data proves this perfectly. It's almost jarring in its perfection.
It really is.
There's a flat dotted line cutting perfectly horizontally across the chart. It is locked at exactly 31 to 32% for decades. That line represents Switzerland's forest area as a percentage of total land area. It does not budge.
They protect it fiercely.
Furthermore, the data shows access to clean energy sits at a flawless 100%.
They have established non-negotiable ecological bottom lines. Protecting that 32% forest cover is paramount because forests act as a crucial domestic carbon sink.
They soak up the emissions.
Right. And by achieving 100% access to clean energy, relying heavily on renewables, specifically alpine hydropower, they've systematically squeezed the carbon intensity out of their economy.
Wow.
The World Bank data set tracks something called adjusted savings, carbon dioxide damage. It calculates the actual economic cost of emissions. And the Swiss have engineered this cost consistently downward, even as their GDP climbs. They are accumulating vast wealth without liquidating their natural capital.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
I expected you might.
It's a beautiful picture. We have this scissors chart, absolutely decoupling pristine forests. But I have to ask the hard question. Are they truly decoupling or are they utilizing a geographic loophole?
Ah, the outsourcing argument.
Yeah. Let's go back to our smartphone or laptop example. If a Swiss banker buys a laptop and that laptop is assembled in a coal-powered factory in Asia, who gets charged for that carbon in this data set?
That is the big question.
Are they just outsourcing all their dirty carbon-intensive manufacturing to developing nations, importing the finished goods, and keeping their own alpine air clean?
That is a critical, highly sophisticated nuance in global environmental economics. It is the debate between consumption-based accounting versus production-based accounting.
Write that down for me.
Production-based accounting measures the emissions physically released within the sovereign borders of a country.
Within their own borders.
Yes. If a factory inside Switzerland burns coal, it counts against Switzerland. This is what the World Bank data primarily reflects. And on this metric, Switzerland's achievement is genuinely spectacular. Their domestic grid is green, their domestic manufacturing is hyper-efficient.
But what about the other one, consumption-based?
Consumption-based accounting asks, what is the carbon footprint of the things a nation consumes, regardless of where they were made?
Wow.
If that Swiss banker buys a laptop made in a coal-powered factory abroad, consumption-based accounting charges that can determined in Switzerland, not to the manufacturing country.
So does consumption-based accounting completely invalidate their decoupling miracle? Are they basically cheating?
Well, not completely, but it adds a massive asterisk. It is an empirical fact of global trade that a wealthy, service-oriented nation imports goods embedded with carbon emitted elsewhere.
Right.
When you factor in imported emissions, the steep, beautiful dive of that carbon line flattens out considerably. They are still highly efficient compared to their peers, but a holistic view must acknowledge that global supply chains mean some of the environmental burden of Swiss consumption is borne by manufacturing hubs abroad.
It's complicated.
It highlights the immense complexity of measuring true sustainability in a deeply interconnected global economy. It's not black and white.
That is a very fair, analytical way to look at it. The data tells a true, highly impressive story about their domestic achievements, even if the global system is a bit more tangled. So let's recap our journey so far. We have a nation that maintains massive, unshakable wealth despite an aging demographic time bomb.
The sinking rowboat they managed to save.
Right. They solve the labor shortage by maximizing human potential through world-class health and education. They convert that education into an impenetrable economic moat of patents and high-tech exports, and they manage to do it while preserving a pristine domestic environment and transitioning to clean energy.
It's a remarkable chain of events.
It begs the ultimate question, though. Why can't everyone else just copy this?
Magic formula.
Yeah. Why isn't every struggling economy just downloading this 15-page deck, looking at the Swiss blueprint, and doing exactly what they do? Just build universities, register patents, and protect the forests. Problem solved, right?
If only it were that simple. You see, you cannot simply copy the outputs without possessing the foundation.
The foundation.
You can't just build the roof of a house and expect it to float in midair. And that foundation is notoriously difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing in human civilization to build.
This brings us to the invisible engine driving everything we've discussed.
Yes, Section 5, Slide 14, the invisible engine institutional trust.
The bedrock of the whole system.
Visually, the data uses a radar chart, sometimes called a spiderweb chart. It tracks 6 major global governance metrics. Now, usually when you look at these charts for most countries, the data points will spike in one area, maybe they have good regulatory quality, but collapse in another, like political stability.
Making a really jagged, uneven, messy shape.
Exactly. But the Swiss data points push so far out to the extreme edges of the maximum percentiles that they form a nearly perfect, balanced polygon.
It's a practically flawless shape.
And the authors have drawn bright red circles around 2 specific points on this web: control of corruption and rule of law. These 2 metrics constantly relentlessly sit in the 99th to 100th percentile globally. They essentially maxed out the stats. This raises an important question, perhaps the most fundamental question in development economics. What is the true, quantifiable value of trust?
Trust.
Yes. We can easily measure GDP. We can count the number of doctors. We can tally up patent registrations. But institutional trust is the invisible bedrock. When a nation's control of corruption is essentially zero, it fundamentally alters the physics of the economy.
How so? Give me a real-world example of how zero corruption changes the mathematical reality for a business or a citizen.
Think about transaction costs, the invisible friction of doing business.
Okay.
In a high corruption environment, doing business requires bribes. It requires navigating opaque, intentionally confusing bureaucracy. It means facing unpredictable legal rulings where the judge might be paid off by your competitor.
Which makes everything slower and more expensive.
Exactly. This acts as a massive, invisible tax on every single economic activity. It repels foreign investment because capital is terrified of unpredictability.
But in Switzerland,
Sitting in the 99th percentile for rule of law means contracts are enforced fairly and quickly. It means property rights, and specifically intellectual property rights, which we saw earlier, are the absolute lifeblood of their patent-heavy economy, are ironclad.
Oh, I see where this connects.
If you invent a brilliant new microchip in Switzerland, you know with absolute certainty that the legal system will protect your invention.
And it completely changes how tax dollars work, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When corruption is absent, public funds are highly efficient. The tax money collected from that wealthy population goes exactly where it is supposed to go.
Into the schools and hospitals.
Yes. It doesn't disappear into the offshore bank accounts of corrupt officials. It goes directly into funding the massive tertiary education system we discussed and building that incredible 4.4 doctors per thousand medical infrastructure. There is no leakage in the plumbing.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, this predictable, transparent, legally bulletproof environment is the ultimate magnet for global capital. It is exactly why they can maintain that massive financial services export sector. People, corporations, and other nations park their wealth in Switzerland because they trust the institutions. Absolutely.
But is it a chicken and egg situation?
The paradox again.
Right. I mean, it's easy to have perfect, corruption-free governance when everyone in the country is already making $80,000 a year and nobody is desperate. But you need that perfect governance to get rich in the first place.
It's a very tough cycle to break into.
It's like, think of it like the operating system of a high-end computer.
Okay.
You don't actively look at the operating system when you're using it. You look at the apps. The apps are the healthcare, the education, the patents. But if the OS is full of bugs, glitches, and malware, which is corruption, none of those high-end, expensive apps are going to run properly.
They'll just crash.
They will crash.
Right.
Switzerland has an uncrashable OS. But how do you install that OS in a poor country?
That is the tragedy of developing economics. It is a painfully slow, iterative process of building institutional credibility over centuries.
Centuries. Wow.
Yes. Switzerland benefits from hundreds of years of stable, highly decentralized, hyperlocal democratic traditions. You cannot simply install Swiss governance 2.0 in a nation struggling with systemic instability and expect it to run. The governance creates the wealth, which in turn reinforces the demand for good governance, which creates more wealth. It is a loop that takes generations to spin up.
Which brings us perfectly to the grand finale of this deck.
Slide 15.
The outro. The sustainable prosperity loop. The final page. And it beautifully synthesizes everything we have talked about for the past hour into one single visual.
Yes, it moves away from the hard charts and graphs into a conceptual diagram, a continuous four-quadrant loop.
Exactly. For you listening, I want you to picture 4 boxes connected by thick, monochromatic arrows forming a perfect circle.
The closed loop.
It starts at the top with institutions, the perfect governance, the uncrashable OS, and the trust we just discussed. That arrow flows directly into human capital, the world-class health, the eradicated infant mortality, and the massive 74% higher education enrollment.
Building the perfect workforce.
Yes. Because of that education and health, the arrow flows into high-tech industry, the mountains of patents, the Michelin star manufacturing, and this specialized exports.
The wealth generation phase.
And because of that high-value industry, the arrow flows into sustainable wealth, the absolute decoupling, the locked-in forest protection, and the indestructible $80,000 GDP.
And
Finally, that immense wealth flows right back into strengthening the institutions, completing the loop.
so what does this all mean? It means the Swiss paradigm isn't just a list of impressive isolated statistics that you can pick and choose from.
You can't just take the parts you like.
Exactly. It is an interdependent ecosystem. It is a tightly wound, highly calibrated machine. You cannot remove one piece without risking the cascading collapse of the others.
It's fragile in its complexity, isn't it?
Very. If their education system falters and they stop producing top-tier engineers, the high-tech industry starves.
Right.
If the high-tech industry leaves because the patents aren't protected by the rule of law, the wealth dissipates.
And then the money's gone.
If the wealth dissipates, the incredibly expensive healthcare system that supports their aging population crumbles. And if the healthcare crumbles, the demographic time bomb explodes, taking the entire economy down with it.
It is a high-wire act of absolute perfection. They have engineered a masterpiece of an economy, optimizing for extreme efficiency and highly specialized knowledge over sheer scale or raw materials.
It's a marvel of modern economics.
But looking at this perfectly balanced loop, it leaves me with one final, deeply provocative thought. And this is something I want you, the listener, to mull over and explore on your own as we wrap up today.
It's a crucial question.
Switzerland has built its entire modern existence on being the smart, highly specialized, hyper-educated brain in the global network. They rely entirely on their human capital to generate high-level intellectual property, advanced financial models, and precision engineering.
Right?
But what happens to a perfectly balanced, hyper-specialized system when a massive external shock hits that specifically targets that intellect?
You're talking about AI.
Yes. As artificial intelligence begins to aggressively automate the exact high-level intellectual property, the coding, the data analysis, the legal contract writing, and the financial services that Switzerland completely relies on, can this intricate loop adapt?
It's a paradigm shift.
If a machine can write the patent, analyze the pharmaceutical data, or manage the global insurance fund faster and cheaper than a highly educated Swiss graduate, can the Swiss model survive a future where the value of human capital itself is fundamentally redefined?
That is the horizon line they are rapidly approaching. Their economic moat has held brilliantly against globalization, cheap labor, and demographic decline.
They survived the time bomb.
They did. But AI is a completely different kind of siege engine. It attacks the very top of the value chain.
We started this deep dive talking about a paradox, a country that should be failing but is wildly succeeding. Switzerland has shown us that with enough trust, relentless investment in human beings, and laser-like strategic focus, you can build a pristine, globally dominant machine without destroying your environment.
It's a blueprint for what's possible.
The only question now is whether that perfect machine is ready for a future that might not need human intellect in the exact same way. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Swiss paradigm.